Hello everyone, welcome back to Altengrad in City Skylines. We focused on a new building style last time and did a small change in the city center. We then focused on the introduction to the post-war housing, what kind of problems cities faced and how they started to solve them. There are now a few more residential areas around the city's edges, one built with the older approach, one with the new experimental prefabricated technology. Don't worry, we will return to that topic a lot more in the coming episodes. Not in this one though, because we go back to a project that needs some renovating, the old bridge. It is partially collapsed, with only a temporary wooden pedestrian bridge next to it, but there won't be any repairs, because Altengrad's planners have something different in mind. We are going to build a completely new bridge, and since I'm going to be doing that in the time-lapse, I would first like to talk about some technicalities, how I did it in City Skylines, what kind of tools I used, and then we are going to talk about the lore and the decision-making that Altengrad's planners faced. So I wanted to build some kind of a modern bridge in this area. I wasn't exactly sure which type. I knew for a fact that I don't want to do something tall, so no arches, no, suspension bridges or anything like that, because it would overshadow the buildings on the waterfronts. It would be basically the tallest structure all around, and I didn't really want to do that. Yeah, sure, we have arch bridges further up the stream, but they are not really in the super urban areas anymore, so in there it's probably okay, but in here I wanted to do a top deck bridge with some kind of a beam below the surface of the road, alright? I was doing this on the live stream, and someone recommended me that I take a look at the Warsaw bridges, and especially the Śląsko-Dąbrowski bridge, because it was built in a similar time period. I think it was finished in 1949, if I'm not mistaken. Might be wrong there, but it's like a similar year that we are in Altengrad right now. Slightly later, yeah, sure, but it doesn't matter. And most importantly, the structure of the bridge in real life is amazing. I absolutely love it. It's like this complicated, old school type of steel structure, which is just so satisfying to look at, really, because it has all those elements that are, from an engineering point of view, clearly defined. The purpose is absolutely clear. Why are they there? It's zero decorations, but at the same time, it's looking very, very nice just from the technical point of view, which in its own is just kind of creating a very aesthetical pleasing object as well, even though that probably is not the primary intention of it. So yeah, I immediately wanted to build that. And by the way, I'm releasing the episodes in a slightly different order. So this is actually the first super customized bridge that I'm doing. And then I was doing the Asturias bridges. So I was taking a heavy inspiration from this one in Asturias and in the process of just making these customized ones, because not gonna lie, if I didn't build this one in Altengrad, I probably would do something a bit more standardized in Asturias as well, because I just wouldn't think about doing this level of customization in Asturias, because obviously in Asturias I'm not that limited by the bridge types, but in Altengrad I am. I kind of want to have it historically semi accurate, but so I cannot do super crazy shapes and whatnot, so I'm kind of limited by the selection. So some kind of heavy customization like this makes absolutely perfect sense. And like I said, I really liked the real life bridge, and I wanted to come close to it as close as I can, right? So here we are with this level of customization. All right, so let's talk about the process and what am I actually doing here. So I'm using procedural objects heavily, obviously, because I just need every single piece of the bridge to be absolutely perfectly fitting what I wanted, to kind of, have it exactly as I have it in my mind right now. So I prepared a little workshop space, as you can see in here. I prepared a surface where I basically just laid down a couple of objects, a couple of markers, rulers, and guidelines or something. And I was just doing these vertices and making them go to these kinds of guidelines that I prepared there. So this is just an average looking arch bridge that I downloaded from the workshop, but I might as well have used some completely different objects. At first, I, for example, experimented with just converting into PO some letters, like letter O, for example, because, it's curved, it has a lot of vertices. but unfortunately you cannot really change textures of those letters because they have like super small texture size. So I had to pick like an actual object of some sorts, and this particular arch bridge was absolutely perfect. It was kind of flat, just flat white texture. I changed that into this concrete texture, which is inaccurate, I know, because this is supposed to be a steel structure, but the concrete texture just looks like your average like gray color with some kind of stains, as if it was slightly dirty, maybe as a result of the construction, or like slight, very, very slight weathering. So I think it's looking actually okay, and we can easily just pass it as some kind of like, or for some kind of a steel texture as well. Obviously right now it's not looking all that steely because we are just not finished, but you know, these kinds of steel structures, they are very typical with these kinds of like elements, all these different beams just cross-connecting, perpendicular, parallel, and all that. So that's immediately going to tell you that it's made from steel, and the texture is just something you're gonna notice afterwards. At least that's kind of my observation about this structure. But anyway, I think it's okay. I didn't really have like a steel texture, so I just had to make do with this one. Now, anyway, as you can see, I'm kind of really going ham with all these different details because I'm also detailing the inside of the structure, and I'm doing that because it's not like I'm going to do like first-person ride of like a boat or something. It probably would not exactly work out anyway. But I definitely want to do some kind of at least screenshots or preferably even like videos from below the bridge, right? And I really want to see the structure because the real life bridge is tall enough that you can easily just go on the waterfront, on the riverbank, and just take a picture, and you will see these kinds of details below the bridge, the technical details from below the bridge. So I wanted to replicate something like that in Altengrad, and this is the result. So as you can see, we created this nice looking frame for the entire bridge. What I really like about this structure, maybe I already talked about it, but I'm going to mention it again. What I really like about these structures is that every single element has a purpose. When you have like a modern concrete bridge, it's usually just like a continuous volume of concrete, and you can't exactly tell, well, you don't even see the reinforcement inside, for example, but you can't exactly tell what is the reason for, this volume here, this volume there. But with steel structures, especially these old-timey steel structures, they obviously had to save materials. I mean, they do that today as well, but some kind of decorations, aesthetic elements are more present in today's bridges, I suppose, especially steel ones. But back in the day, you had these like highly technical objects, and especially truss bridges, right? All of the beams, all of the elements had a specific purpose, and if you were to calculate the loads and all the internal forces and all that all of these elements play a role. And I don't know, that's just something that I really like about these, something really satisfying about these types of structures. It's kind of like engineering. I cannot say the word on YouTube, but you probably know what I mean, all right? Okay, so I was almost finished with the engineering part of the bridge, I suppose. At least the beam, This type of a structure is just a continuous beam, the arching of the inside of the bridge. It kind of plays a role, sure. It's because there is like a very high bending moment above the supports because it's a continuous beam, so it kind of tends to just break at the top. So that's why it has to be taller above the supports, and it can get a bit slimmer towards the middle of the spans, right? And it also creates like an interesting element there because you can just fit bigger boats or taller boats below the bridge. All right, so that kind of leads me actually to explaining why Altengrad planners even chose this decision, or did this decision and chose this bridge instead of repairing the old one. So I'm thinking that in the lore of Altengrad, it was always clear that the rivers, because these rivers are big, and we do have a harbor further down the stream after the rivers, go together. We have a harbor there, and there's obviously need for some kind of river traffic. these kinds of medieval old bridges kind of prevented that. Obviously, barges could pass below these bridges. The arches were wide enough, but not exactly for like bigger barges. And, here and there might have been a couple of accidents or something because it really required a lot of skill to just pass between these very, very frequent supports of the old bridge. So the city planners always kind of wanted to have something different in here, but obviously you cannot just demolish like an old bridge because it's like a historical landmark and all of that, and people wouldn't exactly like that. But, then we had the war, and we had that unfortunate situation when the bridge partially collapsed. And what are we going to do now about it? Now, this also ties a bit to the new regime in Altengrad, because suddenly the city planners are a bit more free in their decisions. They can basically do whatever they want. Obviously, the bridge was always in possession of the city. It was not in like private hands, unlike buildings in some kind of city blocks and all that. But the bridge was always in the city's hands, so technically they could have done anything they wanted to. Now, there were no historical preservation laws just yet in Altengrad. So technically the city could have just demolished the bridge and be done with it. But there was no reason. The bridge was functioning, and it was just okay. So it would be just a huge waste of money to just demolish a perfectly looking bridge. Especially in Altengrad, we obviously had tram traffic over this part of the river as well. And this was like a very important, like a traffic artery of the city. And since the bridge partially collapsed, only a temporary wooden pedestrian bridge was built in here. People were already kind of upset that there isn't any alternative. So, the public opinion was already shifting. Like, the more time passed without repair to the old bridge, then people were more and more inclined towards like a quicker and maybe even different solution. So whether or not that was an intentional play by the city's planners, by the city government, to just let the situation kind of devolve into people basically just agreeing to everything because everything would be better than to just walk on that temporary bridge forever, then, maybe that's how it was. But anyway, the result is this. The old bridge it was decided that the old bridge is going to go away. There is only going to be like a slight remnant of it at the start of the confluence. Maybe later it's going to become some kind of memorial. Maybe it's going to become like a memorial to bad decision planning or decision making, bad planning on the city's parts. Who knows? But right now, people in Altengrad are definitely happy that they can finally cross the river properly, and not only on foot, but also in a tram and in a car, because the old bridge did not support car traffic. This new bridge is much wider. It has many more lanes, 2 more lanes, and it has much nicer sidewalk. And on top of that, it's also taller because it's slightly arched, and it doesn't have that many frequent pillars. So it can easily support some kind of much heavier boat traffic below it. So overall, it's like a technically much better solution for this area, but obviously historically this place kind of suffered because that bridge, the old bridge, was kind of like a historical landmark of the city. So there was some opposition to this decision, but Altengrad is in kind of like already a dictatorship regime, so it wasn't like people could complain that much about it. Some people did, but that's kind of all they could do. Anyway, we are almost done with the bridge. As you can see, like technically in City Skylines is a very complicated structure. So it combines many different networks. It has obviously the sidewalks as a separate structure. It has the road as separate structure, a separate network, and even the tram tracks. These are the tram tracks, I think, that I used for Asturias, because they fit perfectly. They are just the tracks. They are the ground version of tracks, but they do not pull the terrain up towards them, and they do not have the road around them, sidewalks or anything like it. And they also do not support people walking, next to them. So that's perfect. And I was using the curbless roads because they also come with only the asphalt surface. They do not have the sidewalks. They don't have any curbs. and they do not have any like a bridge structure beneath them. They are just two-dimensional structures like that, objects, and you can just play very freely with them. So what I did is I created like overlapped networks with the road and the tracks, because I didn't have the specific network that I wanted to have for this particular purpose, right? And maybe in the later decades I would also like to do it so that I'm going to allow cars to go into the lane where the trams are going. It's something that used to be in Prague. Now I'm not exactly sure if we still have it on some bridges, some of these like vintage bridges where we have trams, but it was definitely something that could be possible to just increase the capacity for traffic. But obviously it's just like an option for the future, and we might just change that in some modern times again. Now, when we go to the riverbanks, to the ends of these bridges, that's where the most important things are going to happen, because we need to just make these ends of the bridges fit with the rest of the area. So in this part, I'm not really sure what this part of the city is even called. The market square, I guess we could call it. It's not really anymore, but it used to be the market square, like the old medieval market square. So in here, we are just going to cut the area with a big road. So this is like a first indication of what's going to happen in the 1960s. We are going to do some kind of renovations. I already mentioned them in the previous episode in front of that hotel building. So this is probably going to give you an idea how that is going to progress. We are going to just use a very big road in here. It's going to have those tram islands in the center of it. So there's going to be a very nice looking tram stop. I'm going to use those red and white railings in there, which is just going to scream, 50s, 60s era, because that was like a very typical element, like a very colorful element as well in the public space, which I kind of liked. And then we are also going to do this very big intersection. It's probably the first time in the city I'm doing node controller on these like just road intersections, or even like just road parts of the intersections. Obviously doing that for the trams, sure, but also for the cars, because it's going to be like the first multi-lane intersections. We're going to have like dedicated lanes for turning, and we are going to have traffic lights. Now, I'm getting rid of vanilla traffic lights, of course, because they look terrible, and I'm replacing them with Bob, I think. Yeah, Bob is the mod, and I'm using the Eclusis modern traffic lights. Yeah, sure, but it's traffic lights. They're kind of like a detail thing in this place. So from the distances where we usually see the city, it's gonna look absolutely fine. And then I'm also going to do some kind of lane arrows. I was not exactly sure when did, for example, in Czechoslovakia, when did we start having the the surface markings, for surface traffic markings, and apparently it was not done in like before war periods, right? It was actually relatively modern stuff to do these kinds of arrows and all these different like lane markings, lines, and parking markers, maybe something like that. So that's also another indication where Altengrad is heading. We are definitely going to improve some of the traffic situations, but just traffic infrastructure by adding all these markings. I don't think I even used intersection marking tools, for example, in Altengrad before, so we are going to see that a lot more in the coming decades. So now on this intersection, we also need to do the usual details. So for example, wires, and I'm also going to start using a lot more street lights, for example. I'm not exactly planning on making Altengrad presentable during the night, but I'm just using these new street lights. I think that these are the East German street lights, a bit newer than the 50s, yeah, sure, but I don't really have like specifically looking Eastern Bloc looking lights for the 50s. So I'm just going to use these, and they look absolutely fine for this purpose. They are very big, they are very different compared to the old-timey street lights, and they are just going to be on these new areas where it's going to be like a nice contrast with all the old one. Must not forget about placing them on the bridge as well. I was heavily using that align version in Move It, or align functionality in Move It. I was using that in Asturias a lot, but this is basically where I learned to use it, because it's absolutely essential for these kinds of like linear projects where you just need to repeat some kind of a detail like streetlights, for example, or even the wires, or I don't know, benches, trash cans, whatever, even though that's not the case in here. Now, let's move to the other side of the river into the confluence area. So in here, the changes were also quite significant. Even though this place was not damaged during the war, we still had to do a lot of changes because obviously the bridge in this part is not originating at the same place where the old bridge originated, but it's going through this little side street. And in here, I have to admit that this bridge I already planned when I did the confluence. So that's exactly the reason why I did this side street, so that it's open and it's basically already prepared for doing some kind of an entrance street towards the bridge. Now, obviously the street was not at the ideal level, so that the bridge is basically going to start ascending even on land for a bit, for a couple of meters basically, and it's going to have like railings, and some of the buildings on the side of the bridge towards the river are going to be a bit more cut off from the street, which might also indicate some kind of like a brutal approach to infrastructure planning, or something like that. We are obviously in a bit of a more historical looking part of the city, so this is just an indication of how things were done back in the day. Obviously today we have a lot of like historical conservation laws even, and just approaches and general sentiments about these kinds of areas and structures. Obviously, this particular place in Altengrad today would have been so protected by all kinds of laws and regulations and everything that you couldn't build anything in there. Definitely not some kind of a modern bridge, right? So if that old bridge partially collapsed today, they would definitely restore it to its original condition, but not here. And also, like I mentioned before, it had to be functional. So that also kind of ties to the socialist, society that we currently have in Altengrad, that all of these things, they had to be functional. And something that I forgot to mention, obviously we are going to focus heavily on industry. So making sure that we have like robust infrastructure is definitely in line with that. So not only on the river, but also on the bridge. More lanes for cars, trucks, so cargo traffic can also go on the bridge and all that. And it's definitely one of the most functional projects in the city right now. So it makes perfect sense. Something I also did that I didn't do in the previous episode, as you can see, I slightly increased the probabilities of people using cars, using the life cycle rebalance mod, because it makes sense. I just want to have more cars on the streets. As you can see, we already do. We have the new car models, and I really want to just fill these intersections with vehicles, finally. But anyway, back to the part of the city with the confluence. So in there we also placed like this wide road, even though there I just cut one lane away from it. And by the way, this is the transition. And then I just placed that tram stop in the center, did the same detailing, which is like a nice contrast with all the old buildings as well, if you think about it. You have the modern details in like a very historical looking part of the city. So, also something interesting. Then we had to do a new like a tram bypass track through that tiny alley there, because we needed to have like a three-way intersection, and we couldn't really do that in the standard way in some kind of one point. So there's like a triangle of tracks in there, new tracks, and obviously doing all kinds of details with the existing intersections, doing some kind of traffic manager, lane restrictions and all that, banning traffic from the fake lanes and all those kinds of little things. And overall, just, the area is looking okay. I was making sure to not really touch the area too much, to not change the buildings, for example, in any way. And I think I succeeded. So I guess now that I look at it, I probably should have done a bit more of the before and after shots of the area, especially around the confluence part or something. I'm going to put a couple of screenshots in here because I was not able to record videos from these particular angles, but I just really wanted to include this. In here you can see the very nice like a curvature of the top of the bridge. I spent hours fiddling with that to make sure with the node controller that it's a really smooth curve on the top of the bridge. The real-life bridge in Warsaw is completely flat, if I saw it right in pictures, but in Altengrad I wanted to have it slightly curved up, like you can see here, because it's also going to increase the space below the bridge. at least in the middle two spans. And overall, it's just an interesting thing to do, kind of to spice it up, right? In here, as you can see, we also put like a little parking lane on that one side of the street because we don't need a second lane in there. It's not going to go towards the bridge anyway. Also, we did some traffic markings here and there, something that's very new, and it forms like a nice contrast really to the old buildings that we have all around. So it's finally telling you that we definitely are in some more modern times. Also, look at the amount of people that we have here. We have the modern trams, of course, going here, and all the people just using the infrastructure is just so satisfying. I really like watching this particular place. Now, obviously, we still have these open pits, open areas where the old buildings used to be. Right now, I didn't really have any plans for those blocks, but I did download in the meantime some buildings from the 50s, maybe early 60s, some kind of like modernist looking structures that I probably would like to just jam in here between all these modern buildings, because it's going to be like a very brutal looking contrast to the new architecture. So maybe that's also going to be something interesting. I guess I will probably leave that for the next decade though. So in the 1950s, we still have one very important project to do, and it's probably going to be a bit more about the lore than the actual construction. This episode was more about the construction because I really liked this particular project. I really just cannot wait to just do these like very technical looking projects. I think I have a couple more of these planned for Altengrad, couple of tunnels, bridges, maybe some other projects as well, maybe some rail yards, stations or something like that. So I would really like to play around with those, highly customize them of course. And obviously, like I said in the beginning, this was like a huge inspiration to make these custom structures even for Asturias. And obviously in Asturias I can go a bit more crazy than in Altengrad. But yeah, we have one more project in Altengrad for the 1950s that I would like to do, which is going to be more about the lore. It's going to be more about the industry and all the related like regime changes and nationalization and all that. I already mentioned that with the bus station episode. So that's going to be in the next Altengrad video. And then we are going to do, I'm not really sure if I'm going to do like some kind of a 1950s overview because we didn't really build that much. So let me know if that's something that you would like to see, or if I should just continue with the 60s and then maybe do like a 50s, 60s overview, because then it's going to be a lot more extensive. In the 60s, I might do some kind of a tram ride because that's the decade where we are going to see a lot more changes to the center of the city, like traffic-wise and infrastructure-wise. So doing some kind of a tram ride through the old and new areas would probably be fitting. No point in doing it now because we only did this bridge. Maybe I can just redo some of the previously done lines, but it would just be the bridge area that would change, so probably not, alright? So we are going to keep that. This shot is especially satisfying because now you can really see that the river just immediately like opened up, right? So we can have so much more boat traffic, and I would probably like to maybe even start doing that. I'm not really sure if I have some kind of historical looking barges, but we are in the 50s, so they don't really need to be that historical. But maybe I'm going to finally get into that and finally install the barges mod for Altengrad as well, but we will see. Anyway, guys, that is going to be all for this episode from Altengrad, episode 58. I already mentioned the plans, so all that's left is to say that if you like this video, then you can do the usual. That is, put thumbs up below it, share it, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel if you are new here. And also, if you like this content a lot and you would like to directly support it, then you can do so by becoming a channel member, either through the link in the video description or the join button below. Big thanks to all the channel supporters that this channel currently has. I really appreciate all your support, guys. Thank you very much. All right, that is all. Thank you again. Goodbye.